You pull into the station on a Tuesday morning, and the pump clicks past $80 before your tank is full. You feel it in your chest, that small, familiar theft. You squeeze the handle, you watch the numbers spin, and you drive away thinking about the price of gasoline the way most Americans think about it, which is to say with irritation and without curiosity. You do not think about where it came from. You do not think about the rock it was locked inside, 2 miles underground, in a formation so tight that for 50 years the best geologists in the country said the oil might as well not exist. And you certainly do not think about the man who figured out how to get it out. A man who, at 16, stood on the other side of a pump just like that one, filling other people's tanks for wages that would not fill his own today. Harold Hamm was born on December 11, 1945, in Lexington, Oklahoma, the youngest of 13 children. His parents were sharecroppers. That detail, sharecroppers, 13 kids, appears in every profile ever written about him, and it originates almost entirely from Hamm's own telling. No independent biographer has verified the specific conditions. What we can say is that Lexington, Oklahoma, in the late 1940s, was a place where poverty did not announce itself because it did not need to. It was the default. Red dirt, cotton rows, unpainted wood frame houses with tin roofs. If you were the youngest of 13 in a sharecropping family, you were not the baby who got attention. You were the last mouth. Hamm has said in interviews that his family had no running water in the earliest years. He has said he picked cotton as a child. These are claims consistent with the time and the place, and there is no reason to disbelieve them. But they have also been told and retold over 5 decades of public life, shaped and polished the way any origin story gets shaped when the ending turns out to be extraordinary. The kid who picked cotton became worth $20 billion. That arc has gravitational pull. It bends the details toward parable whether you intend it or not. What is documented is simpler. By his mid-teens, Hamm was working at a gas station. He did not attend a 4-year university. He has claimed he taught himself geology from library books, a detail that is unverified but plausible because in 1960s, Oklahoma, the oil industry was not an abstraction. It was the economy. Rigs were visible from the highway. Roughnecks drank at the same diners where farmers ate breakfast. A curious kid could absorb a great deal just by paying attention, and Hamm, by every account, paid attention. By 21, he had started a small company. He called it Shelley Dean Oil, named after his daughters. Think about that. Not Hamm Petroleum, not Continental. He named his first oil company after his girls, and he ran it out of a space so small that the origin barely registers as a company at all. That was 1967. It would eventually become Continental Resources, incorporated in Oklahoma, a name that would one day appear on SEC filings and Forbes lists and the docket of one of the most scrutinized divorce cases in American legal history. But not yet. For the next 20-some years, Harold Hamm was an oil man who mostly found dirt. This is the part of the story that gets compressed in the telling, and it should not be, because it is the part that matters. Continental Resources was a functioning company during those decades. It drilled conventional wells. Some produced, many did not. The company was not simply burning cash for 20 years. It survived, it generated revenue, it kept the lights on. But it was small. It was anonymous. Hamm was not on anyone's radar. He was one of hundreds of independent operators in Oklahoma, competing against companies with budgets that dwarfed his. And his name did not appear in the industry press because there was no reason for it to appear. If you have ever run a small business for years, not a startup with venture capital and a launch party, but an actual small business where you sign the checks and wonder about payroll, you know what those decades felt like. The daily grind of a thing that works just well enough to continue. Not glamorous failure, not dramatic success, just the long middle, where the only thing sustaining you is the belief that the next well might be different. And here is where the story turns, though it does not turn the way most people think. The Bakken Formation is a layer of shale rock lying beneath western North Dakota, parts of Montana, and stretching into Saskatchewan. It is roughly 360 million years old, and it was not a secret. Geologists had known about it since the 1950s. The United States Geological Survey had assessed it, mapped it, published papers about it. Everyone in the industry knew there was oil down there. The rock was saturated with it. The problem was the rock itself. Shale does not behave like the sandstone reservoirs that conventional drilling exploits. In a conventional well, you drill down, you hit a porous formation, and the oil flows. Shale holds its oil the way a clenched fist holds sand, locked in tiny pores, trapped in rock so dense that no amount of vertical drilling will make it flow. For decades, the Bakken was a geological curiosity. The oil was real. The technology to extract it economically did not exist. In 1995, the USGS assessed the Bakken and estimated it held a mean of 151 million barrels of technically recoverable oil. A modest number. Not worth the trouble. Ham did not see it that way. Through the 1990s, Continental Resources began quietly acquiring leases in the Williston Basin, the geological province that contains the Bakken. This was considered speculative by the industry. The smart money said the Bakken was a dead end, known oil in inaccessible rock. But Ham had spent decades studying formations, working with professional geologists on his team, and developing an intuition for tight rock that the major companies, focused on easier targets, had not cultivated. The key was not a single eureka moment. It was a combination of two techniques: horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. Horizontal drilling means you send a well bore straight down, sometimes 2 miles, and then turn it 90 degrees, running it laterally through a shale layer that might be only 30 to 60 feet thick. The precision is remarkable. You are threading a needle 2 miles underground. Then you fracture the rock with pressurized fluid and sand, creating tiny pathways for the oil to flow. Ham did not invent either technique. George Mitchell, working in the Barnett Shale in Texas, spent decades and over $250 million developing the commercial hydraulic fracturing methods that made the shale revolution possible. Mitchell deserves credit that he does not always receive. What Ham and his team did was apply and adapt these methods specifically to the Bakken, at a scale that no one else was willing to attempt. And then the numbers changed. In April 2008, the USGS released a revised assessment of the Bakken Formation. The old estimate, 151 million barrels. The new estimate, up to 4.3 billion barrels of technically recoverable oil. The largest continuous oil accumulation ever assessed in the United States. The rock had not changed. Not one molecule was different. What changed was the understanding that horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing could unlock what had always been there. By 2013, the USGS revised the figure again, 7.4 billion barrels when you included the Three Forks Formation beneath the Bakken. The numbers kept getting larger because the technology kept getting better, and the oil had been waiting for 360 million years. Continental Resources became the largest leaseholder in the Bakken. Production went from roughly 8,000 barrels per day in 2004 to over 200,000 by 2014. The company went public in 2007, and Ham retained approximately 68% ownership. As oil prices surged in the late 2000s and early 2010s, the value of that stake became staggering. By 2014, Forbes estimated Harold Ham's net worth at approximately $20.8 billion. The kid who pumped gas was now worth more than the annual GDP of over 40 nations. Nearly all of it was in one company he had founded in a one-room office. But the back and boom was not a clean triumph, and telling it as one would be dishonest. If you had driven through Williston, North Dakota in 2012, you would have seen a gold rush with modern equipment but very old social dynamics. Rows of prefabricated trailers stretched across the prairie, man camps, they called them, where roughneck workers slept between 12-hour shifts in sub-zero winters. Housing prices in a small North Dakota town rivaled Manhattan. A worker with no college education could earn over $100,000 a year and still spend $2,000 a month on a shared trailer because there was simply nowhere else to live. And at night, if you had looked across the prairie, you would have seen the flares. Hundreds of them, burning orange against the dark. Excess natural gas being torched because pipeline infrastructure had not kept pace with production. North Dakota's oil fields burned so much gas that the state became visible from space, a new constellation made entirely of waste. The wealth was real. The cost was real too. Communities strained under population growth, crime spiked, roads crumbled under truck traffic, and the environmental questions, groundwater risks, methane emissions, spill potential, remain contested and unresolved. Ham's fortune, built on the Bakken, was also built on publicly funded geological research. Those USGS surveys that mapped the formation, the Department of Energy research into drilling technology, the federally supported demonstration projects that advanced the science. These were public investments that made the private fortune possible. The bootstraps narrative is not false, but it is incomplete. No one drills 2 miles into the earth alone. Then came the divorce. Sue Ann Arnold and Harold Ham married in 1988, when Continental Resources was still a small, independent operator and the Bakken was still a geologist's footnote. By the time Ham filed for divorce in 2012, the company was worth billions. The central legal question was deceptively simple. How much of that increase in value was the result of Ham's personal effort during the marriage, which Oklahoma law treats as marital property, and how much was passive appreciation from market forces, rising oil prices, and geological luck? The trial lasted 10 weeks. The financial detail that emerged was extraordinary, the kind of granular exposure that billionaires spend their careers avoiding. In November 2014, Judge Howard Harrelson ruled that Sue Ann Arnold was entitled to approximately $995.5 million. The judge acknowledged the difficulty of separating active effort from passive forces in a company whose value was intertwined with commodity prices, the founder's decisions, and broader industry trends. Ham wrote a personal check for $974.8 million. Not a wire transfer, not a corporate disbursement. A personal check, the kind you might use to pay your electric bill, with a number on it that most human beings cannot functionally imagine. And Sue Ann Arnold looked at that check, nearly $1 billion, and sent it back. She said it was not enough. She appealed, seeking a larger share. She later accepted payment. But the moment of the rejected check remains one of those details that compresses an entire world of wealth and loss into a single image. $1 billion check refused. The sheer scale of the numbers had detached from anything resembling ordinary human experience. It is worth noting that the settlement, enormous as it was, represented only about 4 to 5% of the total increase in Continental Resources' value during the marriage. The court's ruling that most of the appreciation was passive, driven by oil markets rather than Ham's personal effort, struck many family law experts as remarkably favorable to Ham. The case became a landmark in divorce law, cited in legal journals as a defining example of how courts struggle to value entrepreneurial genius, market timing, and luck when a marriage ends and a fortune must be divided. After the divorce, after the public exposure, Ham continued building. He became a significant political donor, primarily to Republican candidates. He advised the 2016 Trump presidential campaign on energy policy. He was reportedly considered for Secretary of Energy, though the appointment never came. And then, in 2022, he did something that carried its own quiet poetry. He took Continental Resources private again. After 45 years, after the IPO, the SEC filings, the Forbes lists, the divorce depositions, the quarterly earnings calls, Ham spent approximately $4.3 billion to buy back the remaining public shares and close the curtain. The company that had started in a one-room office would end, or at least continue, in the dark again. No more public reporting. No more transparency requirements. The kid who had nothing chose, in the end, to make his empire invisible. You can read that choice as a desire for privacy, which is human enough. You can read it as a desire to operate without oversight, which raises different questions. You can read it as a 76-year-old man who had spent his entire adult life building one thing, deciding that he no longer wanted strangers looking through the windows. What you cannot do is read Harold Ham simply. He was not a self-made genius who pulled oil from the earth through sheer willpower. He built on publicly funded science, employed teams of professional geologists, benefited from oil prices he did not control, and arrived at the Bakken at a moment when technology and economics aligned in a way they never had before. The timing was not luck alone. He had positioned himself through decades of grinding work, but it was not pure merit either. It was what most large fortunes actually are: preparation meeting circumstance, amplified by scale. He was also not a fraud or a myth. The persistence was real. The risk tolerance was real. The 20-plus years of small-time drilling while larger companies chased easier targets. That was a choice, and it cost him in ways that are hard to quantify. The willingness to bet everything on a formation the industry had written off was genuine, and it changed American energy production in ways that are still unfolding. If you have ever read his letters to shareholders, or the court transcripts from the divorce, or the profiles where he tells the cotton-picking story one more time with that same practice cadence, you see a man who built a narrative about himself and then spent his life making it true. Whether the narrative came first or the achievement did is a question biography can never fully answer about anyone. The next time you stand at the pump and watch the numbers climb past $70, $80, $90, you are standing at the endpoint of a chain that runs backward through pipelines and refineries and drilling rigs and shale rock 360 million years old, through a formation that the United States government once said held 151 million barrels, and later said held 7 billion. Same rock, different technology. Through decades of dry holes and thin margins, through a one-room office in Oklahoma, through a gas station where a teenage boy filled other people's tanks and wondered what was under the ground. He found out. Whether that answer was worth what it cost, the flared gas visible from orbit, the trailer camps in the snow, the billion-dollar check refused, the empire finally taken private and hidden from view, is a question the rock does not answer. The rock just holds the oil, the way it always has, patient and indifferent, waiting for someone stubborn enough to drill sideways. If this story changed how you think about what is under the gas pump, or under any surface you take for granted, tell us in the comments. And if you want to keep hearing stories about the people behind the ordinary things, subscribe. We will be here.